Hello, fellow nature lovers. Glad you landed here on this page. My name's Todd Wetstein. I'm a professional wildlife photographer. I spend half of my year up in Denali National Park doing photo tours and wildlife tours and stuff. And the other half I spend down here in my beautiful home state of Arkansas. And I love it, both places. Both places. Birds in flight are my favorite thing, but wildlife, I'm 95% wildlife, pets, whatever. I kind of like shooting animals and action and things like that, sports. But like I said, I'm glad you're here, and I hope you learn a lot from this page, and I would appreciate your comments. Anything that I can do better, please let me know. If you have other ways that you do things when I explain something, and let me know. It's one cool thing I like about this. I get to learn from a lot of you. You guys get to learn from me, but I get to learn from so many people. I teach over 1,000 people a year, and I'll have somebody ask me a question every now and then that will make me want to answer that, for the rest of my tours. I want to constantly improve, and so will you. It's kind of like playing the guitar. You're always going to get better. But the cool thing I like about it is you don't have to be the fastest runner. You don't have to jump as high as everybody else or whatever. Anybody can do this. And I've proved it. But now that you're here and you want to learn, let's just get started. And what I like to do, I'd like to run right out, shoot some eagles and ducks and moose and stuff, but a little bit we need to do here in the classroom before we get out there so we don't come back crying with bad images and stuff. We're going to do a little bit of classroom here, and I'm going to talk about aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Okay? And I'm going to try and cover it pretty quickly. This is a lot of information thrown at you, and don't think, I'm struggling to take it. This is a lot of information, okay? And I got to do it quick. But I'm going to start. I shoot 95% of my photos in Aperture Priority. If you're shooting a Canon, you'll have a dial here, or any camera will have a little round dial on the top left most of the time anyway. And you have an M, A, S, and a P. If you're shooting a Canon, it'll stay AV and TV. Let's put it on the AV if you're shooting a Canon. Let's put it on the A if you're shooting anybody else. Now what we're doing there, we've chose Aperture Priority as our mode to shoot in. And what happens there, we're picking the aperture, and your camera is always going to be picking a shutter speed. Your camera is going to pick a shutter speed based on the size of the opening of your aperture. Okay, however much light we want to let in. And it's also going to be basing that on whatever your ISO is set at, your ISO. Okay? So, Aperture Priority, what it does is it gives us the control of the scene. We don't want the whole thing to be in focus all the time, Like, we've all opened up Sports Illustrated, and we've seen that football player laid out. He's just caught the football. You can see the pupils in his eyes, and you can count his eyelashes. The people in the stands look like blobs of paint. Even the people coming to hit him are blurrier. Your eye goes right to his eyes. And that's because the photographer put that little red dot in the viewfinder over his eyes, or the black square, whatever it is. He put that over his eyes, and he got focused on his eyes, and he had a shallow depth of field. So that blurred everybody else in the scene, and your eye's not searching. Is this a picture of the cheerleader, or the dude on the third row, or the football player? It's a picture of the football player. It's just plain. Okay, he did that shallow depth of field, and we do shallow depth of fields by picking a big aperture. Sports photographers are shooting anywhere from, and wildlife photographers, they're shooting anywhere from 2.8 to 5.6. Now 2.8 isn't really this big. I'm exaggerating. But 2.8 is a big opening. 22 is a pinhole. Okay, so it's not like you would think. It's the opposite. 22, little bitty. 2.8, giant. Okay. Now when you have that giant opening, it's flooding your sensor with light. Okay. If all that light hits too long, you're going to overexpose. So a lot of light gives us a fast shutter speed. The shutter has to close fast. Okay. The faster the shutter speed, the sharper that image is going to be. Okay? Now, when we're shooting sports and wildlife, we want a shallow depth of field, so we're going to shoot 2.8 to 5.6. When we're shooting landscapes, we're going to shoot those anywhere from f8, f9, f10, f11. Somewhere in there is the sweet spot of your camera. Now, 2.8 is the shallowest depth of field that this lens shoots that I have on here, and 22 is the greatest depth of field, okay? So more is in focus at f22. Now, if we shoot that football player at f22, what's going to happen is you're going to look at that photo. Well, is this a picture of the cheerleaders or what? Because it's going to make everybody else in focus. It's going to have a greater depth of field, okay? So it's going to be a really busy image. You're going to be searching, what the hell am I looking at, you know? The other thing it's going to do, if you go back to the pupils and the eyelashes and stuff, they're not going to be as sharp. And the reason being is because when you close that down, now it takes a slower shutter speed. It takes longer to get that exposure, okay? So the big apertures give you a lot more shutter speed than those little bitty apertures, okay? So that's what gets our sharpness. Now, the reason a lot of people will think f22 being the greatest depth of field, that's the sharpest image your camera could take, and that's not right, and I just want to explain why. f8, 9, 10, and 11, remember I said that's a sweet spot in our camera. Now when we're shooting at those medium-sized apertures, f8 to 11, what happens is when the light comes through the lens, it goes through that medium aperture, it's able to strike that sensor going in a straight line, okay? That's the key to your sharpness. Now, have we ever seen a picture taken at night of a light and we see the star pattern around it? What they've done there, that's a desired effect dialed in by the photographer using aperture. And he's closed that aperture down from f11 to f16 or f22. And now what happens when the light comes through that lens, it has to bend, after go through the aperture, it has to bend up and down and left and right to strike the sensor. When that light's doing that bending against the night sky, your sensor is picking up what we call light diffraction. Okay, during the daytime, you don't see that star pattern, that desired effect that we dialed in at night, but you still have the diffraction in there, so it's degrading your image. So at f8, 9, 10, and 11, you don't have light diffraction. So that's why we shoot our landscapes at f8, 9, 10, and 11. Okay? Now, we can put that light, that star pattern around a light with those smaller apertures. I mean, there are reasons for them. We can also, as a nature photographer, if you've ever seen that milky look on a waterfall, we can do that, you know, with our apertures. And a tripod. Anytime we're shooting slow shutter speeds, long exposures, we need a tripod. Okay? So, when we're shooting that football player that we just talked about, say we're shooting a football game, a high school football game Friday night, and we get there at 7:30 kickoff, man, we got really good photos. Everything's really sharp. It's getting towards the end of the game, and we're noticing, man, everything's soft, and I got trails and flashes, and just not good. What happens is the sun has went down, okay? So when it gets darker outside, your camera needs more time to get the exposure set, okay? So if you're my age, you've bought film before. And when you bought film, you bought 100 speed film or 200 or 400 or whatever. Okay, we bought 100 speed film to shoot outdoors. We bought 400 to shoot indoors. The reason being is because we didn't have as much light inside. Okay, so we had to buy film that was more sensitive to the light. And 400 speed film was 4 times as sensitive to the light as 100 speed film. Okay, now we don't have to change film or anything like that. We can just change our ISO, and we don't have to shoot 24 or 36 or 12. We can shoot one at 200, we can shoot the next one at 800, and then go back to 200 on our third one if we want. That's what's really cool about these. 400 speed film or 400 ISO is going to give you 4 times the shutter speed as 100. So what happens at that football game, if you get there, we always want to shoot in 100 ISO if we can. But as it gets dark, we'll have to raise our ISOs to keep our shutter speeds fast enough. Okay? So I'm shooting a 500 millimeter lens. I need 1/500th of a second. and I look down and I notice, I look through my viewfinder and I see I got 1/250th. Okay? I don't have to go home. It didn't get so dark I have to quit playing. What I do is I take my ISO and I go from 100 now, if that's what it's on, and I take it to 200. So now instead of shooting a shutter speed of 250, I'm at 500 where I want to be. Okay? If I look and I'm at 200, I need to go to 400. I just got to double my ISO and I'll double my shutter speed. Okay? You don't always have to double your ISO. Sometimes one click will get you up, whatever you got to do. But you don't want to go any higher with your ISO than you have to. I mean, we can go higher with the ISO and get faster shutter speeds. But it comes to a while, too much of a good thing is too much of a good thing. You're going to get more grain in your photo. So you don't need to go any higher with your ISOs than what you need to get your shutter speed where you want it at, whatever your target setting is, 500, 400, whatever. So we've talked about aperture and how that determines our depth of field, and that's probably the biggest struggle in this game is realizing what I want to shoot at, But if you're shooting sports or wildlife, you want to shoot somewhere 2.8 to 5.6. If you're shooting landscapes, generally you want to shoot f8 to 11. And if you're shooting long exposures, you're going to shoot f16, f22, something like that, depending on how much light you have. But that's just kind of a quick rundown of what we're going to do when we go out in the field. Okay? So kind of go over these things on your camera and get used to, getting in aperture priority, changing your aperture, learn how to do that, and learn how to take a photo. Now change your aperture and stuff like that, and starting out what I would do, I would shoot in JPEG. It's a smaller file and stuff like that, but when you're starting out, a lot of times you're going to shoot soft images. So don't load your computer up with a bunch of, raw files that aren't going to be any good. When you get to the point that you're saying wow a lot, you're going to go from JPEG to RAW, But it's not important in the beginning. You'll still get good shots. But once again, thanks for landing on this page. And if there's anything I can do better, or if you didn't catch something very well, I need to explain something a little better, please let me know in the comments below. And thanks again, and I hope to see you soon.